I can't tell. Okay, so it's about a minute. So I'm not going to make you sit through and suffer for a minute. And then what you want to do is turn your vocal. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. The plugin is called well, I don't know if it's a plugin. I think it's a standalone actually, to be fair with you. It's called Isotope RX8, and I think you can get a lower version. I don't think you need advanced to use what's called the music rebalance tool. So just figure out which version you get the music rebalance tool. You can get a lower version. I don't think you need advanced to use what's called the music rebalance tool. So just figure out which version you get the music rebalance tool, and it will do the thing that I'm talking. So you want to take a record. This record's from tracklib.com. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit just so we don't. It reminds me of Sam Smith. So I'm going to take, what I would do in this case, find the vocal area that you like, or you could do the whole song, but just keep in mind it may take longer. Highlight it, hit music rebalance. And then what you want to do is turn your vocal to the 0 mark, turn everything else down to negative infinity, and that will remove all the other stuff and only leave the vocal. Quality, you want the best, and then hit render. And once it I'm not going to render here, but you would hit render and it will strip it away and you'll just hear the vocal. Let's see how long it might take. It might not take that long. So I'll hit render, see if this is fast or not. If it's not fast, we'll skip this part. And I can't tell. Okay, so it's about a minute. So I'm not going to make you sit through and suffer for a minute. I'm going to cancel that out. So I already have the acapella, and let's pull it up. And then from here, what we need to figure out is the key of the song. So it's probably best you actually load the original song and the acapella. This song's called Was It Love? So we're going to grab the original because we need to find the key of the song, which is important. And then we want to grab the acapella for however many bars I have it. Okay, so once you have those two, we're going to open up a plugin. I like Scalar. It's just easy to
orient ourselves properly in life towards whatever the highest value might be. And it's part of an guide us. And well, that's something we have to talk about an awful lot. I mean, I'm interested in hero mythology.
Every year from now until 2020, there will be
mythology, primarily because the stories we tell one another and have told one another from time immemorial constitute our attempts to orient ourselves properly in life towards whatever the highest value might be. And it's part of an ongoing discussion that the whole human race participates in, that's part of the process by which we identify and rank order and communally celebrate, let's say, and pursue our values. And it's of crucial importance to do that ritually and dramatically and also explicitly and philosophically. So, and it's also a problem. It is a problem when I've talked to Bjorn Lomberg and Matt Ridley and Marion Tupy, for that matter, about work. I mean, one of the things, they're perfectly aware of this, that there's something lacking in the story of progress against absolute deprivation. It's not enough. That's part of what may lack its compelling nature, apart from criticism that you raised, which is, well, what about deprivation, which is a perfectly relevant criticism. But you have to have both of those. Like, just because of poverty doesn't mean that victory over absolute poverty isn't worth celebrating. It certainly is.
No.
So, okay, so we have to orient ourselves spiritually. Absolutely. I agree with that. There's no doubt about that.
My sense is that, vanquishing of absolute poverty is an inadvertent side effect of different objectives that are to do with the conservation and perpetuation of the abiding machinery of commerce, capitalism, and consumerism. Maybe an inadvertent consequence. Like, for example, don't you sometimes, when you think of slavery and the abolition of slavery, that slavery was maintained for as long as possible. Then there comes a point where it's like, oh God, we can't get away with slavery anymore, but we will rescind our right to have slaves, but we will keep an economic class primarily made up of people, in, say, the case of the United States of America, made up from that same kind of background, that these kind of, and like that can then be rightly labeled progress, but in terms of a kind of an epiphany, a cultural and social epiphany. Now, I know this is difficult, Jordan, because I suppose I'm suggesting there are universals, that there is an absolute North Star that we can all refer to, but isn't any religious man making that claim that there is some...
I think it's too one-sided, Russell, because, I mean, there's no doubt that corruption exists and that hierarchies can degenerate into power structures and become tyrannical and counterproductive. But that's what happens when they degenerate. That isn't how a properly functioning human hierarchy works. And they're not very stable if they degenerate in that manner. Let me give you an example. You can tell me what you think about this. And then I'll talk about slavery, particularly because it wasn't just an economic calculation to get rid of slavery. I mean, Britain, the movement to abolish slavery was driven by truly believing Christians. They had a walloping effect over a number of decades in eradicating slavery. It was a moral move. And, it was replaced in some sense by another kind of slavery. But one thing that happened in some sense is that as the modern economic system displaced the slave system, which had existed forever, we all became our own slaves, right? Because most people enslaved themselves for 8 hours a day, and then the other 16. And so we've substituted our own slavery and the slavery of machines for the slavery of others. And that wasn't only technical, it was also a moral decision. And I don't think you should discount the moral striving that went into that, because it's an important part of the historical record. And you don't want to ignore the contribution of moral people in the past to our progress, right? Because it gives you a very dim view of humanity. Lots of people knew slavery was undesirable and wrong, and risked a tremendous amount to move beyond it.
Actually, so, I wouldn't discount that moral contribution, with regard to any of the great cultural conversations and conflict. But what I feel is that the inverted commas, the system is most adept at absorbing what is required and repackaging. For example, when when British colonization of India ended, we sort of soon see the establishment of economic entities that are enable a continuum of comparable relationships. So ordinary life for many people in that region doesn't significantly improve. I feel that most power that is conceded under the condition that it doesn't affect the interests of the powerful significantly. That there is a rarefied strata of society which is, I would say, somewhat immobile, although I suppose we could argue that the emergence of the barons that have replaced oil and steel barons in the tech world, that is different. There's some sort of fluidity. There is, I'm not arguing against that. But what I'm saying is that if we have a goal, and I'm not talking about old, like Marxism, socialism, the left in those terms. I'm actually talking about I'm not talking about the realization of God's kingdom on earth. Like, when you talk about in a personal way, Jordan, the idea that there may be someone that would look benevolently upon you if they knew that you were living your life trying to be beautiful. What type of world, what type of communities, what type of systems, what type of democracies might we favor if this became our shared collective and individual priorities? And
that's what we're trying to figure out, Russell. That's why we're having this conversation.
Yes,
that's what we're trying to figure out. If fundamentally, I believe that's the purpose of real discussion. And I think one of the reasons that YouTube conversations like this have become so powerful is because you can actually have those discussions. What we're doing is so different than network TV. It's so different. It's so revolutionary. Like, I was talking to a Wall Street Journal reporter the other day, and I said, well, why do you like YouTube? And he said, well, the conversations just follow this unpredictable thread forward, and it's so interesting to watch them. I said, well, that's the logos in action. That's what you're seeing. There's nothing more compelling than that. So if we're doing this right, look, the last conversations we've had, including the very last one, have been received very positively. And I believe the reason for that is, I think that to the best of our mutual abilities, we're trying to get smarter than we were before the conversation because of the conversation.
Yes.
And people respond extremely positively to that. And isn't that wonderful that that's the case? And so we are trying to figure this out. And I would also say, don't assume malevolence where ignorance is sufficient. When you look at how a large system operates, you don't want to forget that part of the reason it's not doing so well is because people actually don't know how to do it better. It's not the only reason. Malevolence exists, for sure. But, and then what do? Well, you try to dispel the ignorance, your own ignorance. What you and I are trying to do right now, hopefully, is to dispel our own ignorance and to share that process with the people who are watching and listening.
I believe that the reason that you had such a profound impact in your sort of roaring campaign through identity politics, through maleness, is because, to me at least, it seemed as an observer, it's underwritten by years of clinical practice, a deep understanding of and you were genuinely orating on conquering unconscious territories, of awakening out of the unconsciousness. And like when you say that now, don't assume malevolence when ignorance will suffice. They know not what they do. Most people are unconscious. Our systems are unconscious. But for me, there is a reason that mainstream media prohibits and precludes certain types of discourse, favors other types of discourse, and this for me is because let's take it apart for a minute. Let's take it apart, because we'll start with the ignorance before malevolence issue, and so we'll look for non-moral reasons first, and then go to moral reasons. And I think that's a safe approach, because you don't cast stones any more than necessary that way. Well, there are massive technological differences between YouTube and network TV, despite the fact that they're both video. The first is, there's no bandwidth restriction. Bandwidth is now free. You and I can talk for as long as we want, and essentially no one has to pay for it except with their attention. And then it's permanent, whereas with network TV, it was evanescent. It evaporated as soon as it was spoken. Well, now this conversation will be around for probably longer than either of us would want it to be. It's as permanent as a book.
And that what that means too is that I don't have to assume that my audience has a limited attention span or no memory anymore, because they can go, I know that they can go out and find out things on their own. And so when I go to do a network TV interview now, it feels like I've transported myself back in time to 1950. And the person I'm talking to, when I'm sitting in the green room before the interview, they're a person and we have a conversation. But as soon as the cameras go on, they're no longer a person. They're a puppet of a machine. And I'm not saying that critically. I'm saying because the bandwidth was so incredibly expensive, there wasn't time for experimentation. It was too expensive. And so everything the interviewer did was scripted. Well, then it was scripted according to essentially the dictates and interests of the corporation, obviously. And so then what you end up on with network TV is a discussion with a talking head representing that monolithic organization. You're not talking to another person. And if you were, that person would get fired, right? Because they would now be an individual instead of this immense machine that was necessary because the communication technology was so expensive. So you start with that, and then you might say, well, and furthermore, it was warped by the fact that the corporations of a certain size are protecting their existence, which of course they are, and so are the people within the corporation. Of course they are, just like we would fight for our hierarchical position, of course. So, yes, but all that's gone now, and now we have this, and now we're figuring out what to do with it.
Now, what you said there about the sort of the position of the journalist in the chair and how they become an automaton because their role is so prescriptive within that corporation, that's no different to something that, you know, Chomsky would have said 30, 40 years ago. You wouldn't be in that chair if you didn't share the beliefs of the corporation. This is, for me, chimed, of course. Yes, of course. This chimed with something Yanis Varoufakis, the former Chancellor of Greece under Syriza, in that brief moment after the economic crash when there was a surge of leftist populism in Greece, said. He said that when he met with the EU, he realized, even when talking to the most powerful minister over economics with whom they were arguing about their sanctions, he recognized that chancellor, he was someone like a German chancellor or whatever, said that he only had the power, and this is in some ways plainly obvious, he only had the power afforded to him by his role. That suggests to me a kind of intransigence. And like when you talk about like sort of people in a mainstream media outlet, that they're a representative of a certain set of ideals, well, the same becomes true in a political establishment. Now we know that there are relationships between, obviously we've known for a long time, there are relationships between media and government that involves lobbying, commerce, shared interest. Now I know that when you talk about it from a sort of an anthropological perspective, you say, of course, we would all protect our positions in a hierarchy. And this returns me to the point, Jordan, where it requires of us as individuals a kind of personal awakening, that perhaps the one has to undergo a kind of nekia, am I saying that right? The kind of journey into darkness that, you know, that you have recently experienced, and I'm sure most of us have our own version of, and to come out the other side of that with a conclusion not being how do I achieve more as an individual, but how do I convey love? How do I convey Christ consciousness? How do
let's start with that then. So first of all, you know, everyone is now a TV producer and a radio host if they want to be. If you have a voice, you can communicate with, you have the technology to communicate with as many people as you want. So then the next question is, do you have the will, the ability, the desire, and all of that? But you certainly have the technological means. So it isn't that people have been rendered voiceless. They have in certain regards, but in other ways, they're so powerful that it's absolutely beyond comprehension. And so, and I would say, well, I am definitely of the mind that it would be best for everyone to orient themselves. And I've tried to figure out what that orientation would mean. And some of it is, and I've used history as my guide as much as I've been able to, philosophy and religious ideas, all of that, trying to puzzle this out. It's like, well, the love part is, okay, you have to decide. You serve someone. That's an old idea. It's Christ or Satan. Fundamentally, that's an archetypal reality. And what that means in some sense is that you're either working for the betterment of things because you're in favor of being and its flourishing, and perhaps even its playful and beautiful flourishing. You've decided that despite the horrors of existence. Despite the horrors of existence that would drive you to resentment and bitterness and hatred and the desire to destroy, you've decided, no, I'm going to aim up. And that's love. It's like I'm going to aim up, and I'm going to bring everything I can with me. Okay, then the next thing is truth in service of that. And one thing I learned, I think, is that I tweeted something out the other day, and like I see people all the time, and they have something they want, and then they use their language to get it. Okay, that's not how to use language. That's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because why do you think that your theory about what you want is right? If it's wrong, then you're saying things that are wrong. And so I would say instead, try this. Say what you believe to be true and accept what happens. And that's an adventure, man. You do that for 10 years, and your life will be so different that you won't be able to believe it. It's unbelievably adventurous to only say what you think is true in right there and then, to be in that moment and to have decided that there's no agenda. I'm just going to say what I think, regardless of the consequences. And I don't mean carelessly. I really do not mean that. The absolute opposite of careless. You pay attention to every word. And the consequences are miraculous.
There's a kind of mysticism, I think, that you are describing. Firstly, the ability to remain entirely present. Secondly, the idea that you can respond authentically without an agenda of personal advancement. This requires, I think, a kind of transcendence. It certainly, from my understanding, would require a kind of ego death. The sort of energies that compete in me seem to, the tension seems to be between this sort of a very vivid sense of love and awakening and service and sort of values of which I'm quite proud, and still, I would say, I don't know if I would want to call them atavistic, but quite primordial, sometimes unformed, certainly libidinous, concupiscent sort of rushes, like that. I love the idea of living authentically and truthfully in a moment, and how sort of potent, radical, punk and effective, divine that could be, mischievous, tricksterish almost, and
right. Yeah, that's got the romantic element there, because it's unpredictable. It's absolutely unpredictable. You just don't know what's going to happen. But if you let's say you have faith. Let's say you have faith. So let's figure out here what we mean by faith. So we're going to say, I have faith that if I act out the proposition that being should flourish and I should aid that, I'm going to risk my life on that proposition. That's going to orient me. I could be wrong, but that's going to be the direction of my life. And then I'm going to tell the truth in service of that. Well, the faith then is the acting out of that, is the actual uttering of the words, and the willingness to observe what emerges as a consequence. And you think, well, do you believe that love and truth prevails? Do you believe that? Oh, if you believe it, act it out. Well, then you act it out, and it's very unpredictable, and you do have to watch for the emergence of these counter positions that you describe. You believe it, so you act it out, and you observe what happens, and you accept that as regardless of the consequences, in some sense, by presuming to begin with that if it emerges as a consequence of the actions of love and truth, then it is by definition good, regardless of what you think at that moment. I mean, because you have to put your faith somewhere, right? Because you don't know everything. You're stuck with it. So do you have a better theory than that? I can't find a better theory than that.
No, the requirement for faith is pretty clear. The limitations, the limits of our capacity for knowledge, the limitations of the senses, the abiding mystery. These seem to be perennial. They don't seem like they're going to be surmounted anytime soon. I recognize that. I am drawn to ask you, like when you went into this terrible crisis of health with yourself and Tammy, your wife, and that it was all consumed by this great suffering, you disappear into this, from the external perspective for several years. And during this time, there's this incredible ongoing cultural war sort of peaking out that again sort of dissolves into the end of Trump's presidency and the emergence of Joe Biden, and this kind of global pandemic. The world shifts seminally during this period. How do you feel that? How do you adjust to that? Having been through what you've been through personally, which we've touched upon and we've talked about previously. How do you feel about what's changed culturally? How do you align these ideas up now?
Well, I would say I'm still puzzling that out to some degree, and like everyone, partly because I'm faced with, as we all are, with this unbelievable technological revolution. I mean, I think, what do I? That's such a complicated question. I'm doing more of what I was doing before, I suppose. I still believe that, at least insofar as I'm concerned, that there isn't anything better than I can be doing than continuing to encourage people. And that's how I see my role, is that, I'm trying to, let me tell you a story. Okay, I'll just a quick story. And this happens to me on a regular basis. But this happened today. I was sitting on Bloor Street, which is a main street in Toronto, and this kid came up. He's about 20, and he said, I don't want to disturb you, but I watched your biblical lectures a few years ago, and they really helped me. And he was going to walk on, and I said, stop. I said, what's your name? And I always ask people, because as soon as you get their name, then you're in a conversation. They know that you want to talk. It's an open invitation. And I do want to talk, because I want to find out, okay, I helped this kid, apparently. How? Exactly. What worked? Because then maybe I can do it again, right? So he said, well, it made me rethink my religious belief, and now I'm going to church. Said, okay, like, are you going every? He said, I know you don't go to church, or you're not a practicing Christian. And I said, do you go to church? He said, yes, but it's online right now. I said, well, what do you do there? And he goes to the services, and then he has this group, 20-year-olds, and they talk to each other and try to orient themselves properly. And I thought, well, that seems good. That seems like a good thing. So, and he said that. I said, well, what else did you learn that was helpful? And he's going to law school. And he said, well, I learned to stop comparing myself to other people and berating myself for what I didn't have. And I learned how to reward myself for making incremental improvements. And I thought, so he's comparing himself to who he was yesterday, which is dead on. It's like, there's no envy in that, man. And that's a game you can win. And it's an improving game, and anyone can play it. And so I thought, that's great, because now you know how to reward yourself. And so he's in law school in his second year. He said he's going to be a corporate lawyer in New York. So he has this massive opportunity, because that's an immense opportunity. And he's trying to figure out how to integrate his legal education in the corporate world with his profound emergent morality. And I think, yes, great, man. You hear a story like that, it's like, well, that keeps you going no matter what. Like, more of that, right? More of that. You can't get too much of that. And then I can tell people, you want to look for something meaningful. You're not going to find anything more meaningful, more deeper than trying to orient yourself towards the highest good, trying to tell the truth, and trying to further other people's development. It's so rewarding that it's too much. That's the problem with it. It's too much. And part of, I think, why I've been sick is because of that, too much. Partly from observing how much lack of encouragement there has been for people, and how many people are starving spiritually and psychologically because of that. I saw that on such a massive scale, but also to just see the consequences of having addressed to the limited degree I've been able to address it. Like, it happens all the time. I had this guy. It's so strange. This guy walked by this guy the other day on Bloor again, and he was kind of a street-looking guy, kind of rough, and bent over, about 45, 50, but looking older than that. And he had a mask on, and he wasn't looking so good. And he took his mask off, and he came over to me. I had no idea what and he said, I love you. I thought, Jesus. My friend was walking with me. The guy told me about it. We walked away. I said, what do you make of that? And he just shook his head. He said, you sure have a lot of people, men coming up on the street saying that they love you. It's like, it's a hell of a thing, Russell. And God, how could you want something more? How could you possibly ask for something more than that? How could anything that was narrowly selfish, let's say, in the sort of grasping capitalist mode, to use the cynical left-wing caricature, and it's not like there's never truth in that, but we're all grasping, that's for sure. how could anything that could possibly produce, even in theory, compete with that? They're not even in the same universe.
I understand what you were saying. And I'm thinking about it, it's because you have this very particular background in clinical psychology and academia as a teacher, and the edification and raising up and teaching of people is plainly so important to you, and it seems now more than ever. And I feel how open-hearted you are, and perhaps have always been. And I wonder if there's something. This the question continually asked of you of why do you feel like you resonate with males? It seems to me, I wonder, is there a wound in your maleness, or a wound in your adolescence? Is there something in you that is open, do you feel, that has made this connection possible? Because it can't simply be the translation of these theories.
I think some of it's actually the doing of my father. I think I had a good father, and he encouraged me. Like, my dad instilled within me his faith in me. Fundamental, like, we had our set twos, you know. It's not like our relationship was without conflict, but I knew I had something that none of my friends had, or virtually none of them, which is I knew that my dad fundamentally believed in me, right? Fundamentally, regardless of anything. And what he thought that fundamentally, I suppose, that it was a good thing that I was around, or that I was a good thing, something like that. But it was deep, and that gave me a sort of confidence, I suppose, or faith. Both of those, I suppose. He encouraged me. I had that encouragement, and I think so. You asked me a specific question. I'm encouraging young men. Why? Because I think I believe this. It's like God only knows what you could do, and we need it. Like you're a good example. I mean, look at you, Christ. You're unbelievably creative. You're so smart. You jump from idea to idea. You're very charismatic, you know, and you have this immense talent, and that led you into wastelands of all sorts, you know, because you didn't know how to control it, or, you know, you weren't oriented properly. God only knows why. But you're trying to gather that all up and to figure out what to do with it. It's like, great. Who knows what piece of the puzzle you would contribute if you got your act together and contributed everything you can. And I mean, it's clear that you're trying to figure that out. Otherwise, people wouldn't be responding to you. That so many of the comments were, you know, my opinion of Russell was, you know, neutral or negative or whatever. But I watched this, and like, he's really doing his best, obviously, and that really impressed me. So it's so nice to see that kind of judgment. Hey, it's like, well, I can see that he's trying, and so now I'm on his side. And so it looks like you can kind of trust people to respond positively to that, and that's so nice, isn't it? That's actually the case.
That is.
You can let yourself out.
Yes. I can begin to. I get the idea that, sort of, again, looking at it as best as I can interpret from a Jungian perspective, that some of these unformed primordial forces that found expression in some ways that were unhealthy for me and probably for others, are now aligning. They're becoming sort of, I don't want to use the word colonized because it has so many negative connotations, but activated towards positivity.
Integrated. Yeah, because you don't want to suppress them or repress them. You want to bring them on board.
Yes,
absolutely. And that's, you know, and that's the other thing I'm telling young men too, and because I certainly believe this to be true. All that aggression, that capacity for aggression and violence, that physical strength, that dangerousness, those are unbelievably useful once integrated, admirable. You know, I talked to Jocko Willink the other day, and the guy's a monster. You know, he's 2 feet thick, and he's a warrior from the age of 3. That's the kind of person he is. He goes to Naval SEAL training, and what do they teach him? You have your friend's back. You subordinate all that antisocial aggressiveness, that dominant striving, that power, that physical strength, that desire to destroy, even all of that. You take that, you control it. You serve other people with it. You have their back. And he says very straightforwardly, that he's an effective leader. To the degree that he's been an effective leader, it's because he takes care of the people around him. And that's it. So he integrates all that, what could otherwise be, catastrophic, criminal or genocidal horror. He's trying to integrate that into whoever it is that he can be, if he's everything that he can be. He told me about he got a literature degree after he had gone through the Naval SEALs. And I just kind of skipped over that. I don't really know why. And he called my attention to it. And then we had a 20-minute conversation about the vital importance of literacy. And it was so interesting that this character, who's got all these other attributes, would then say, yeah, but, I got literate. I became literate. I learned to communicate. And that multiplied my ability manifold. And so don't hesitate to develop he didn't say it in these terms, but your logos. It's like, absolutely. And men are turning to him, young men in particular, because he's such a good role model. He's written these books for little kids about how they can, fortify themselves. And it's not no competitive games. Let's raise little boys like little girls. It's not that at all. It's like, stand up, man up, monster up, get it together. And then go past that, right? And subordinate that to truth and love and the ability to communicate. Then you're something. But that way the vices can be virtues, right? You don't have to say, well, we'll just eradicate aggression. Well, yeah, sure. It's like cutting off your arm. You're going to get rid of that motive force. That'd be like getting rid of sexuality. You don't want to get rid of that. You want to integrate it.
Yeah, it ain't easy. I mean, what I want to, and I loathe being asked questions like this because it's sort of, but you'll see why when I ask it. There's people that have a very negative response to me. There sort of always has been ever since, even when I was famous for frivolity. There were people and with you found yourself sort of very quickly at the heart of a cultural war for some reasons that were, I suppose, obvious because of the nature of your emergence into sort of public life and the specifics of that. But what I think when I see you talking, when I listen to you talking, and you are an open-hearted man, you have these sort of plainly your relationships with females define you. What do you think is the energy behind the specifically gendered aspect of like the public discourse prior to the couple of years you took off for health reasons? What was if we could say in your analysis, which I would still query about the attraction of men is because you encourage and you give them confidence. I feel that somehow pain, the wound, has to be the point of connection, but that's probably me bringing my own stuff. And then for females,
no, I don't think it's just that. I mean,
what's being activated?
There's something about that that's right. I mean, well, that's a good question. It's not like I understand why the people that I'm talking to are disaffected. The men I'm talking to are disaffected. I understand that. That's the shared pain, I suppose. I understand why they're doubtful and about putting forward their best. I'm not contemptuous of that even. I see that it's a deep wound in a sense, and no wonder. And it is something that we all share, but you can just admit that and then figure out what to do about it. That's the next thing. Despite all that, you say, yes, really, that's the case. Despite the patriarchal tyranny, despite the malevolence of our ancestors, despite the Holocaust, despite the catastrophe of human history and the inadequacy of your own ability and the blackness of your heart, it's like none of that's justification for not moving forward properly.
So then what do you feel like, and it's a question I ask again of myself, it must be interesting, I imagine, for someone to be literally an analyst and then be the subject of so much cultural attention that is, polarizing. So we've sort of discussed a little what we you feel that is that that speaks so deeply to men, and I'm getting a clearer idea of it. But like the inverse of that, the sort of the famous YouTube, let's call them the YouTube greatest hits, that Channel 4 News interview, the GQ one. What do you think was being driven at there? I understand that like sort of because I've watched them and I know them, that sort of it's on like, no, you're not paying attention to gender inequality, pay gaps, etc. And I'm familiar with your arguments, like which obviously again underwritten by data. But what do you think is the emotion, the feeling? Why is this academic at this point in history? Why?
Well, I would say, some of it's okay. So some of it is that females are rising up to challenge the patriarchy. They are doing that, and they're more powerful than they ever were. Like, women have always pushed and tested men. Well, why? Well,
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with me and Jordan Peterson. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking to him. I think he's fantastic. If you want to listen to this